Today's talk is on the subject of Samhain. Samhain is an Irish word that gives us a Gaelic festival, and its celebrations begin this evening, as no doubt all of you will know, from all the fireworks and fires around you, sometimes safe and sometimes dangerous. But it's also taken as All Hallows or All Hallowtide. That includes 3 days from today, tomorrow and the next day, 2nd of November inclusive. And it's quite an ancient festival. Both of these two celebrations together have merged into one that we call Halloween. It was in the early 7th century, actually 609, that Pope Boniface IV endorsed a holy day commemorating all Christian martyrs. But that evolved because by another 100 years, 200 years or so, there were churches in Ireland who were holding that feast and commemorating All Saints on 1st of November. Now, how does that weave into this season? Actually, the word Samhain is the word for November in the Gaelic language or Irish language. And it marks the end of the harvest season, and it marks the beginning of the winter or the darker half of the year. And celebrations, as you will be aware, have started in the evening because the Celtic day begins and ends at sunset. So it's about halfway, the celebration between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice that we know on the 22nd or so, 23rd of December. We know from various archaeological investigations that some of the Neolithic passage tombs in Ireland are aligned with the sunrise around the times of this Samhain and also Imbolc. And these tombs would include a number of significant sites, something called the Mound of the Hostages and the Hill of Tara and so on. All of these are connected. These are Neolithic passage tombs. And with the sunrise at the time of Samhain. And Samhain, of course, is a threshold festival, a kind of, in the ancient days, a boundary that was seen between this world and the other world, making contact with spirits or fairies, Eossi, more likely, deities in the old Celtic tradition. And of course, these beings were appeased with offerings of food and drink to ensure that people and livestock survived the winter. And this is the key to all our mental movements that we call prayer. That is a positive output, if you will, of an intention that mobilizes all the subtle forces of nature into something auspicious and for us going forward. And then, of course, it is also where we remember the souls of the dead, particularly our dead ancestors, that is our family kin, because these were also thought to revisit their own homes, their ancestral homes, seeking hospitality, and a place was set at the table for them during a meal. We have just celebrated Durga Puja, and the idea is that the Divine Mother of the universe, Parvati, comes and visits homes this is the tradition, let's say in West Bengal. And so we now entertain this Mother Goddess in various forms for the next 9 days. And when I think of these spirits coming to visit their homes, it seems to me quite similar. They're looking for hospitality, they're looking for a place, and even at meal times, a place was set at the table for them during a meal. And then it was thought that mumming or guising or putting masks and clothing and so on, these were all part of a festival, and they're part of this festival for at least the early modern era. And of course, people go from door to door in costume. In the older days, reciting verses in exchange for food. And this is where we get the trick or treat tradition that is really established in Ireland and passed on, of course, to America. And so when children appear at your door, they have no idea about all of this. It is just a delightful moment in time where they dress up in various costumes. And of course, by disguising yourself in this way, the idea is that we appease this interchange, these beings in another world that are crossing over. And so in this way, we take away all the deleterious forces that are around us so that we can progress in the darker moments of the year with a positive attitude going forward. And also with a sense of fun, sense of humor. Now, I'm not sure, but I think it's highly likely that this Samhain, this word, is derived from the Sanskrit samavaya, meaning assembly, a huge gathering, because this is how people celebrated this particular time of the year. It was essentially a festival for the dead that had been seated inside the other world beyond. And so we find the necessity that we have to honor our ancestors, because what are we as individuals but the product of ancestors on both sides, from the XY chromosomes, both sides of the spectrum, for generations and generations, coming to fulfill all their wishes through us. But this Samhain, of course, was one of the four main festivals, the Gaelic calendar. And it also, as with all festivals, marks the end of the harvest, the beginning of winter. In other words, it's an agricultural festival. And the importance of that is that we can use every single opportunity we have available to us throughout the year to draw our minds in a sense of attunement to the divine and the source of the divine. And part of this festival would be the ritual bonfires. And traditionally, in the older days, they would be lit on hilltops, and there were various rituals. So you light a fire and people run through the smoke and jump over people and jump over the fire. And when the bonfire burned down, they were scattering the ashes, vying with each other. Who should scatter them most? A sense of fun. And so in some areas, two bonfires were actually built side by side, and the people, sometimes with their livestock, would walk between them as a kind of cleansing ritual. And we know this because the bones of slaughtered cattle were said to have been cast upon bonfires. This period is a very limited time, as seen in the olden days, when the boundary, as I said, between this world and the other world could easily be crossed. But we cross these worlds every night. We vacate our waking life with our waking body and our waking concerns, and we drift into a kind of new field of experience that we call dream. And we glide across not even noticing, vacating our individual personality and becoming countless egos in a dream, and even dropping that, dispensing with that, and going to a state of peace. And so we rotate, waking, dream, and dreamless sleep. This round of events reminds us of this other world, that it penetrates into this world, that there is no clear division between the two. But one thing is for sure, we sit behind. And when we sit behind in a realized way, understanding that we are not the mummy or the guise or the mask in front, we are not part of one of these worlds. Our true nature is our immortal self. And those who realize that are called saints. And so therefore it is appropriate that this is also All Saints. All Saints Day followed by All Souls Day. What about those who never refined their spiritual life enough for them to be saints? What are the characteristics of saints? We recognize them everywhere universally, whether these are saints in the Eastern Orthodox Church, whether they are saints in Islam, Islamic Sufi saints, whether they are saints in Hinduism, where they are formally recognized in Roman Catholicism or not. We recognize the characteristic of pure souls, whose dominant trait will be purity, sattva. That is absolutely no trace of selfishness and a sense of wishing the world well, being, as it were, open channels for divine grace to flow everywhere indiscriminately, not judging whether a person is good or bad, not understanding whether they are useful or not, whether they are insulting to us or whether they are flattering us, not reacting in any particular way other than with this one optional trait, and that is love. Because we do have various options in reacting. One, of course, obvious one is we can confront with a kind of aggressive attitude or critical attitude. Another, we can just withdraw and yet retain resentment. And another thing we could do, of course, is to stand and confused and yield to the whole situation. But the person who has the character to think in a different way will only bless. And so the fruitful reaction to this would be love, pure love, just beaming love. So what is a saint? A saint is a person generous enough to share their smile, generous enough to light up your eyes with their personality, generous enough to show themselves as a model of light, that is of knowledge, knowledge meaning wisdom, not intellectual knowledge, inner wisdom, and generous enough to share themselves, generous enough to be a world mover, generous enough to bless all that come into contact with their presence. Such people are saints. We have some great descriptions in the Bhagavad Gita of such, only the terminology changes. We call them people who are above the three evolutionary forces of life. Trigunatita, we call them. Another description will be people who have an equal-mindedness and a steady wisdom, people of steady wisdom. Sthita prajna. These are the two technical terms applied to these people. Instead of them retreating into a cave or a monastery, these people are actively engaged in beaming love everywhere. These are people whose whole life, whose whole activities are orientated toward truth and goodness and love and nothing else. No negative thought entering into their mental field. Or if it does, transforming that into something that is enlightening, something that is sacred and holy. And playing this game of life. What is this game of life? Taking all the essential negative things that we come across and transforming them into something useful. We can use the biblical language if you like, transforming swords into plowshares rather than the other way around. Having an understanding that it is only through this pure life, this prayerful life, this unselfish life, that we can transform anything, because what is the alternative? The alternative is complete selfishness, which exhibits itself in two ways: pleasure and also power. If you look at all the contemporary wars today, it is because of these two things essentially. It is to maintain certain ways of living, and it is to exert power over certain regions. Now you see, these regions don't belong to us. But who knows it? Who realizes it? Who really wants this peace? Not many people. It is simply just an intellectual ideal, which we would like to have. But mostly when we talk about let there be peace, we're really talking about let me personally have peace and leave me alone nicely, thank you. So these are all the saints. Now, one way, really, in spiritual life that gives us a great level of inspiration will be to study the lives of saints. There's a wonderful book, Women Saints of East and West, that was published by the Vedanta Society there in England, in the UK, many, many years ago. And they compiled many, many women saints from different traditions. There are Jewish women saints, Sufi women saints, Indian Hindu women saints. There are Jain women saints. There are Christian women saints. Why women in particular? Well, because sainthood is not the province essentially of man. Any human being has access to their own innermost area of freedom, their own inherent nature, their own sense of infinite possibilities. It is just to take our individual talents and our energies and move them in a direction which is generously transforming, becoming a world mover, if you will. Recently, we celebrated Sister Nivedita's birthday. And if you were to say, what was she? A world mover. This was also the language that she used, and the language that her teacher, her master, Swami Vivekananda used. Be a world mover. We should have more world movers. When children are born, all we can do is cultivate the inner area of infinite possibilities so that they also become world movers. Effortlessly doing it, but transforming themselves firstly, and that inner transformation will then spread inevitably everywhere. So that wherever they walk, peace walks behind them. Wherever they are, they leave a smile on somebody's face. They leave glistening, smiling eyes, shining eyes. What is your mission in life? To give people shining eyes, to lift their spirits, to make sure that they are not only from the saint's shadow taking on a certain level of saintliness, but perpetuating that in a transformation in their own lives. And the greatest saints, of course, would do this by a look or a touch. But most people, most of the saints, they won't do it, and most are unrecognized. Most are humble people who go about their daily business unnoticed, not that remarkable. What does the character of Ramakrishna's consort, Sharada Devi, show us? That we can be ordinary people, and yet we can be shining examples of saintliness and holiness, just by doing our normal daily duties. The fundamental book I always give people when they come to me for some kind of spiritual guidance is, I ask them a question: have you read this book? I think in the 18th or 17th or 18th century book, uh, Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence, a thin book, no doubt. And his fellow monastics urged him, please, can you write down or can you tell us what is the secret of your happiness? Because they noticed that, in any context where you have people together, there'll be ups and downs because relationships would be like that. And here was somebody who managed to do things like cleaning the floor, cooking food, answering the door. And if you ask him, what is your secret? Why are you always remaining in such a state of equilibrium and happiness? He would say, practicing the presence, practicing the divine presence. Wherever I move, the divine moves with me as my companion. And so this is one of the secrets of the saints. And studying their lives is tremendously rewarding and interesting as well. And what will we do? Imitate. When Swami Vivekananda roamed about, he carried several books with him. One was The Imitation of Christ. How will we get any spiritual enlightenment except by taking the example of somebody who's enlightened and trying to imitate them in as many ways as we possibly can? And then what about the all souls? What about those who didn't make it? Part of the generosity of the all saints will be to pray for every soul, every living being who has walked on the earth and who is now in a posthumous state, still on the pilgrim journey, hasn't stopped, still moving along. We should encourage them and beam our good thoughts toward them as well. So these are various things connected with, just to summarize, Samhain, which celebrates this interchange between two worlds just for today and tomorrow, and the All Hallows celebration that merges with it, where we call it Halloween, that also celebrates all the various masks as well, or uses masks that imitate these various beings and entertains them and makes sure that we are not threatened by them. Now, of course, there's a psychological component to this word masks, and the psychological component is that where we have various fears deep down inside, we can go and do an exercise whereby we face them. How do we face them? We face them by visualizing them and dialoguing with them. And once we dialogue with them, we realize they diminish and eventually disappear. It's a wonderful technique. In other words, to bring the fear out, that is, to name it, identify it. And then we can, shame it and tame it is the kind of language that we use for it. And by doing that, it disappears because we realize it for what it is. Something that is not threatening at all. We can transform demons into diamonds, make that transformation. If we take many of the mythologies, for example, in Hindu mythology, we'll see that transformation taking place. Various demons in certain disguise and being transformed and released because they were under curse, for example, something of that nature. So we have the capacity to do that. And those who have lived a long and fruitful life should inspire the younger generation, should do something useful for them, should be the living examples of what life has taught us on our pilgrim journey. And we are all on this pilgrim journey. Some are at the lower rungs of it. Some are a little lost, but they will be found. Some have completely deviated, but they will come back on track and move forward again. We shouldn't worry about those. We rather worry that our pilgrim journey, our steps are steady, our steps are careful, our steps are pure, imbued with patience and also persistence. We should learn the art of operating behind the mask, understanding that the mask is something that we can use rather than something that we have to hide behind. So you might find this evening children coming out with various makeup or various masks and so on as an indication, they may not understand it, of course, that there is something precious behind the mask, namely the child itself. You ask a child, the child will know. So you put a mask on for Halloween. Are you the mask? Will you go to school like that? No, of course I won't. Because it's something I put on. I may have spent a long time, or my parents may have spent a long time assembling this costume. And we may bring it out once a year, or maybe a new one once a year. But it is a costume. This body is a costume. This body is a mere pillowcase in the language of Sri Ramakrishna. This body is simply a piece of clothing that we can put on and we can take off. As soon as we attach to it, as soon as we recognize it in a different way, then we are caught in it. And we have to wear the costume for the whole year, if you use this analogy, instead of just once a day or once a night. Imagine wearing some of these costumes that are there available this evening for the whole entire year and for all the subsequent years thereafter. And there'll be no distinction between the All Hallows Day or the Halloween and any other day of the year, and half the fun is gone then. And so we should learn to discriminate, to discern. I am not this mask. I am not the psychophysical. I am not this. As soon as I think I am, then pain will ensue in various ways. As soon as I recognize I'm not the mask, joy will ensue. And given the option of joy or pain, it's probably preferable to opt for the joy. Well, with that in mind and with the short meditation prior to that, I'm going to leave it early this evening so that you can enjoy the rest of your evening. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
I hope you're all well. Good.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om